This is Zombie Woof at the Schoolhouse from Excelsior Studio in West Virginia. Blue skies high.
I think maybe it's time I just start like whipping the camera out and like capturing these things when they come to me, because I know I lose a lot or some, and even though that kind of allows me to like cook them a little further and strainer them and then edit them. What the fuck? National Park Service, interpretive media. I'm talking about outdoor exhibits. We call them waysides. A lot of people call them waysides. They're those things that stand on two legs at an angle about waist height when you go places that are interesting, and they tell you about the place, and that's the whole point. And most of them that you'll find around America kind of suck. Some really suck. But National Park Service for the last 40 years had a center in Harpers Ferry called Harpers Ferry Center, where I worked, who, among other media things, were the creators of the style guide and the implementers of about half of the actual planning, design, and fabrication of all the waysides in all the parks. There's about 20,000 of these, and maybe 10,000 of them were managed. The creation was managed in Harpers Ferry, and I probably worked on about 5,000 of those. I think that what everybody doesn't know is right there in the word interpretation. It's such a secular word. It's so easily misconstrued. Far and away, it's known for its connection to, language interpretation. That's not what it is. Look up Freeman Tilden, and he is kind of the father of National Park Service interpretation. He wrote some books. He established some principles. You might say interpretation is a subset of education, but it's really not even that. It's more of a companion. It serves a different purpose. And because it has a different function, it has to be constructed differently. And what I'm talking about is, it may be best explained through a little example of what happens so often, more often than not, and results in pretty poor waysides. The wayside generally is at a place of some interest. Let's pick one. I don't know, Washington's birthplace. The house George Washington was born in. Okay. So here's the house. Now it's a park. People come to see it. You put a wayside exhibit in front of it, maybe next to it or in the back on the walk. You put some of those around at places where there's something to talk about. Well, keep it simple. You put a wayside in front of his house that says George Washington's birthplace. Okay. Maybe it shouldn't say that, because you probably already got a sign there that says George Washington's birthplace. It's probably the one thing they know, right? So it's a bad title. You say something that's going to hook their interest and tell them something about what they're seeing, what's on the ground in front of them. We used to refer to it as captioning the landscape. So a wayside is deemed to be needed, and usually the content, the information is available in many sources, and very often one of the best is like local historians who have like a bottomless well of knowledge and information available about George Washington's birthplace house. But here's where the reality sets in. You're outdoors, and in the outdoors, it's apt to be hot, cold, raining, snowy, windy, loud. And the people out there, they're not out there to just stand there all day. They're walking around to see things. And as they're walking around, they come upon a wayside exhibit, and they're only going to spend so long at it, and you can't blame them. And there are like three sets of people. There's the first set who spend about 5 seconds. They read the title and see the main graphic, which is why the title and the main graphic are so important, because that's the point at which maybe you can hook them into falling to the second category, which is average. The average person walking up to one of these Wayside exhibits is going to spend 20 seconds. That means they'll see the image, they'll read the title, and they'll probably get through the first 2 paragraphs. There better only be about 3 paragraphs on that Wayside, because in 20 seconds, you're not going to read more than about 100, 150 words. And it's going to be about that many per paragraph. And the largest single failure of most Wayside exhibits is that they have way too many words to read in the amount of time that people actually spend reading them. We used to recommend about 150 words total on the panel. 250 tops, but that was too much already. And I've seen these Waysides with 800 words on them. You have to stand there for 5 minutes to read the thing. Which brings us to category 3, which are the sycophants, the aficionado, the fanboys of whatever the resource is. And yeah, they're going to stand there. The guy who studied Washington in college is going to stand there all 5 minutes. He'll read it. Sometimes it's interesting enough that people will stand there and talk about it. That's great. But these days, the other thing that happens, of course, is people take a picture of it, which is a good thing. But still, this is not the place to educate people about the resource. They know what it is. You want to tell them something compelling, something that will inspire them to go learn more. It used to be, somebody could go back to the visitor center. They could go through the museum, talk to the reenactors, talk to the interpretive staff, and watch a movie. Or then they go home, and when they get home, they go to the library or they look it up in the encyclopedia. Nowadays, everybody just pulls out their phone and looks it up, whether they're still there in the car on the way home or they're bored 10 years later. Your job with that Wayside is to tell them something that's compelling enough that it'll stick with them. So here's Washington's house, and just to the left is this smaller building. That's the chicken coop. That was the chicken coop. George lived here from when he was born till he was 7. He used to play with the chickens. He had a habit of chasing the chickens. Right in front of you, on that ground, you could have stood here and watched young George chasing chickens. Right there, in the grass in front of you, between here and that building. That's what the Wayside does. See, Civil War, right over there, you see the hole in that building? That's where the cannonball went through. And look down at the field between here and there. Now look at this photo. You see all the dead bodies? Yeah, that was the day after the war. You're standing here. We're not going to try to educate you about the Civil War, even though, like, the last third of Civil War buffs are the most intense, and they'll stand there all day and read like painted raised metal letter stuff all in caps. We're trying to make it easy. We're trying to make it so that if they actually only spend 6 seconds, they still get something. The title itself tells them something. I don't know. George chased the chickens here. George chased chickens here. And if you get nothing else, you'll be like thinking about that later going, really? And maybe you'll look it up. This is interpretation. But usually what happens is the interpretive project gets turned over to somebody who doesn't quite have the level of specialty expertise to do interpretation. And they treat it like it's education and do what's in the industry we call a book on a stick. And some very well-meaning, knowledgeable, dedicated old historian from the town will write the text. It'll be like 800 words, and somebody will suggest they cut it down to 500 because it doesn't fit. And basically it will suck. And it's only because of the lack of common knowledge about the field of interpretation and how to do it right. By the way, there's also a little thing called accessibility, and you don't need to be extreme about it to do a couple things that you ought to do. And one of them is keep the type size large enough to be legible. 36 point for the main text, 24 for the captions, no smaller. And keep a good contrast. Please do like black on tan. Don't do white on purple. It just makes it much harder to read. It really does. Never do all caps. And avoid the funky typefaces. You know, there's a legitimate argument between serif and non-serif fonts. And it's a bit of a generational thing. The older generation was more accustomed to the serifs. They were literally designed to make something more legible in a body text form. But the newer generation tends to see more on smart devices than they do out of books, and so they more commonly are looking at sans serif. I think with a generation moving on, it will actually become true that it's better to use the sans serif. But the college for the blind keeps up on this, and I'm guessing they'd probably say either one's fairly acceptable now. As long as it's got good contrast and it's sufficiently large that people can read it without everyone having to reach for their reading glasses, if that even worked for them. So that's about it. I just wish that people who did Waysides would call me first. That's all. Sometimes I'm free, but not cheap.